Hello, Premium Poker friends, and welcome to the homework answer webinar for the homework assigned for October of 2018. First of all, a slight apology that at the top of the handout sheet containing the homework problems, it said September 2018 for the second time. I trust if you're watching this that you figured out that this was actually for October. The answer key that is attached to this webinar, even though it says September 2018 at the top also, it is, I assure you, for the corresponding homework problems for October. So now that we have that all sorted out, let's carry on. So the first thing you're going to want to do is, if you haven't already, print out a copy of the teacher's edition answer key here. These are, as always, my responses to these problems, which I'm going to use to work through this. Again, as always, it's okay if you got different answers, as long as when you're going through this, you find that your rationale for your answers squares up with somewhere along the lines of what I'm going to be discussing as I go through mine. So let's begin. So I'll be honest with you, this comes from a hand that I played, the Borgata as usual, and it was against a pretty talented opponent. Went on after this hand to have a couple other run-ins with him, and came to find out that my assumptions that I made for this hand wound out to be well-founded. This guy was very solid, balanced, a good tournament player who had come over to play some cash after he had gotten knocked out, and was one of the good tournament grinders. There have been some bad ones also who show up for these Borgata Open, Lord knows, but this one was one of the good ones. And I kind of got a suspicion of that for this hand. We got into this hand, and the real question mark I had at the end of the day was, did I make the right decision on the river? But we can't get there before we get to the previous decisions all the way from pre-flop. And the issue here is one of balance defending. And if you sneak preview, this isn't too much of a sneak preview because you've done the homework, I assume, we get down to question 17, which was, it tells you what my actual hand was, and I wound up folding on the river. And right afterwards, I felt as though I made the right decision in the moment because I had done it, but then I started doubting myself afterwards and thinking, should I have defended with the actual hand that I had? How wide do I need to defend here to be unexploitable in a balanced sense? And I really wanted immediately, I started this one in my notebook right away to go over a homework problem on this topic. So what you have here is the result. So let's see how I did given what my ranges were. Again, if you had different ranges, you might have come up with a different answer, but as long as you were defending at a proper frequency by the time you get down to the river, that's really all that matters. But we'll go through where I wound up and whether it wound up being correct as we go through my responses on the answer key. Okay, so let's start again with a brief description of our villain. I kind of touched on him already. 2-5 hand, as always. He's in his mid-20s, quiet. His play generally seems to be tight aggressive, but he's only been at the table for about 30 minutes, so I don't know too much about him yet. Here's what I do know. He is not yet opened at all from early position in that half an hour. So for the fact that I'd seen him show some other aggression, to me, that means that he's being pretty tight pre-flop. So hence the tight half of the tag equation here. And he's not opening rather wide or frequently from other positions either. So when what happens here happens, which is he opens from under the gun, what we need to realize right away is that this guy's under the gun range is going to be tighter than most. And that kind of colors everything that happens in this hand. So villain does open from under the gun to $20. Pretty standard sizing. It folds all the way around to me. I don't completely remember this table, but that's a bit abnormal for a Borgata weekend table, but such as it is. Folds all the way around to me in the big blind. So it's just me and the villain who are going to be heads up in this hand if I decide to continue. So let's talk about three betting range. And if I want to have one here, what does it look like? So I don't think that this guy is so insanely tight that I don't want to have any three betting range. Now, there are some people against whom that actually would be a viable strategy. I know some folks who are regs who play at the Borgata who are tight, and they are only opening uber premiums. Like most people's three betting range is what they're opening from under the gun. So against one of those folks, it just doesn't make much sense to have any three betting range, because what's it going to be? Aces and kings? How do you balance that? Like, what are the kings, the light component of your range? You just can't have enough holdings to actually have a range. You just have like one or two different hands. That's it. So in that situation, I don't think there's much merit to having any three betting range whatsoever against an uber tight person. But that's not this guy. He's just tight. We haven't seen anything to show that he's drifted into hyper nit territory. So we can have a three betting range against this guy, but not surprisingly, it's going to be pretty tight because this guy's opening range is fairly tight. So let's see how tight is tight here, at least in my opinion. Okay, well, first of all, what we need to realize is because, one, we're from the blinds, and two, the strength of this guy's opening range in general, we are going to adopt a linear / depolarized structure here. And if you want to break down more of what this looks like in depth, this was the discussion point in our last homework. So if you feel like you need a refresher on that, I would go back and touch up on that briefly, maybe, and then come back here. I'm not going to delve very deeply into it again. I will just say, again, how that looks is you have two or maybe three components to that range. The first, we're going to go through these in just a second, what they look like. The first is starting off in the top left of our standard range chart here. See if I can point in that direction, that way. Yeah, up in the top left are, of course, the strongest components. That's where you're going to start with hands that you are three betting with that you plan to continue in some fashion to a four bet. Whether that is you're going to call the four bet or you're going to five bet shove. Again, that's the first band you're going to have. Right below that, you're going to have a band that you're going to still three bet, but you don't intend to continue with to a four bet. So those are your lighter component of your three betting range that you just intend to lay down if your opponent turns around and four bets you. If you want to, then right below that, you can have a flatting range. And not always do you want to have a flatting range. Sometimes, particularly from the small blind, you will just have a three bet or fold strategy. But here, as you'll see, particularly from the big blind, since you already do have one big blind invested, you have to call off for less. So it just makes sense that as compared to the small blind, you're more apt to have a flatting range from the big blind instead, just because you already have that much more money invested. There might be some hands where you're like, okay, this is too good to fold, not so good that I want to turn it into a three bet. So what am I going to do with it? Well, your only option is to flat it. It may not be the most ideal option when playing out of position to your opponent, but it's too good for you to lay it down. What you don't have in the linear range is a break for a light component in the middle of your range. So again, it goes strongest, slightly less strong, then in terms of three bets, then a flatting range, then your folds. So no light component anywhere in the middle. All right. Again, if you'd like more in depth on that, it's been in our prior couple videos. So what do our components of our 3-betting range look like here. So this is question and answer number 2 and number 3. So for answer number 2, I give my premium 3-bet range, that is elements that I'm going to continue in some fashion to a 4-bet, as what you see on your screen here. Very, very, very tight range of a mere 34 combos. Queens plus, and then ace king, ace queen. So that is it. All right. From there, we go on to answer number 3. What is the band right below that? It is this. Just jacks, and then ace queen suited and offsuit, and king queen suited. So again, these are things that we are going to be 3-betting, our lighter 3-bet range, but we use that term loosely here. All that means is that we're not saying that these are bluffs in any fashion. What we're saying is that these are the band right below those things that we will continue with to a 4-bet. So these we 3-bet. If we get 4-bet, these will be our folds. Right below that is the element that's going to become most important for this homework problem, which is our flatting range. And again, when we just hover back over these, you'll see bing, bang, boom. They go one band right after the next. So our flatting range here, I like to use, again, things that are right below the last band. But also, these make good sense for flats, because if you look at all these, they could be in pretty decent shape still against our opponent's opening range, even as tight as we suspect it to be for this villain. So let's take the ace jacks. There is somewhat of a chance that our opponent is opening with, I don't think ace 10 offsuit, but he might be opening with ace 10 suited or ace 9 suited. If he's opening with any of the suited aces, then either of those holdings is really far ahead. So we don't quite know where he's opening with how many aces, but ace jack suited gives us a decent chance to be dominating some of those holdings when we both hit an ace. King queen is a good holding to use that can dominate some of his kings and queens if he's using things like king jack suited, queen jack suited. I doubt he's opening queen jack offsuit. If he's opening down to king 10 suited, I'd be surprised. If he's opening things like jack 10 suited, probably is. Even a tighter range under the gun is going to include things like that. It's just such a good playable hand. So anyway, even king queen offsuit is ahead of those holdings. So it's marginal with a bunch of these things, whether or not we're going to run into the component of his range that they're ahead of, but at least they stand a chance of dominating his current holding and not being dominated by his current holding. Such is not the case with queen jack suited and jack 10 suited. These are just playing purely for their straight and flush potential, and we need to realize that going in. They also do have some blocker effect to queens and jacks, not entirely while we're playing them, but it doesn't hurt. But mostly we can hit a straight if we do, where there's going to be cards on board, right? It's going to hit Broadway or, somewhere around there, king high straight or what have you, that is going to have some interaction with his range that might get us paid. So when we hit Broadway, he's going to have 2 pair a lot or trips. Or a set a decent amount of the time. And that's the kind of hand that can get you paid off. So we use those hands mostly, if not exclusively, for their drawing value. We want to be cognizant of that as we continue forward in the hand. And we use our next best pocket pairs, again, I don't really suspect that either of these is going to be ahead. If we're in a pair versus pair situation, we instead use them for set mining potential. Okay. We don't want to be set mining with too many holdings, like all the way down to the lower pairs there, just because if we do, we're going to be set mining a little bit too much against such a talented player out of position. I think if you read a lot of the material that I've done in the compilation book, which should be out soon, I'm working on that constantly now, and there's a bunch of set mining examples in there. But I think you'll notice the difference between those, where I advocate set mining like all the way down to pocket deuces, and this situation is here we're out of position against a talented player who's really not going to pay us off 24/7 with his entire effective stack here when we hit a set and he has pocket aces. Whereas, you know, there's a lot of people at 2-5 who will just hand you their stack with an overpair when you hit a set. But this dude is certainly not one of them. So we don't want to be set mining down extremely low. Okay, so that is our flatting range. And in the actual hand, that is what I do. I flat here, so that's the range that we're going to continue with for the rest of the exercise. First of all, question and answer number 5. We've touched on this a little bit. These are way slimmer than in prior homework problems where we had a linear range. It was way, way wider than this. And that, again, is because of this player's tight tendencies, but also because he opened from under the gun. I forget exactly what the last homework problems defending range was against where the villain opened, what position the villain opened from, but I know it was not as early as under the gun, and it certainly wasn't from somebody this tight. Okay, so what we want to be able to do is, especially with the premium component, this range back here, we want to make sure that this is stuff that if we get 4-bet, we want to really, really know that we can continue only with super premiums. So that's why this is so tight. Okay, so back to this range that we're going to carry forward. So let's go to the flop here. Again, he opens 20, and we flat from the big blind. And our flop comes the queen of clubs, the jack of diamonds. There we have it. And the 8 of hearts. Okay, there's our flop. And we check, of course, and our villain bets $25 into the pot of 42. So, what hands would we raise here for value? And I have that I am only raising with a mere 2 combos of, I didn't even make a chart for this because it's just 2 combos, of Queen Jack suited. So that is it. That's our only Queen Jack here. Again, we didn't play Queen Jack offsuit, so that is our only 2-pair combination on this entire board. You'll notice because we just flatted, we also have none of the sets. We didn't play queens or jacks in this flatting range, and we didn't play down to 8s. So our only premiums that we have on this entire board, unless we want to get into raising something else, which I don't advocate, is just our 2-pair combos, and that is Queen Jack suited, 2 combos. That's the answer to number 6. All right, well, now comes the tricky part, because we have to balance this somehow, because we're against a good opponent, and we want to make sure that he won't know that when we raise here, we're not just doing it with Queen Jack. So we need to use something. Now, here comes the first major struggle in this homework problem. What in the world do we use here to balance that? Because here's the problem. Look at every other thing on our chart here. Showdown value, showdown value. This is what we're raising with. This has showdown value. This has showdown value. And these have showdown value. Uh-oh. We have nothing that's not a made hand on this board. So that means, by necessity, we must turn something that has a made hand / showdown value into a bluff. And this is unusual because we're not usually in the habit of doing this. But of course, that's the whole problem with this homework assignment is we have this incredibly tight range right off the jump. And that's why this makes for a really interesting, I hope you agree, challenging homework, is that we need to maneuver around in the situation where we don't have much wiggle room with our combos whatsoever. Okay, so what makes for our best bluff? Now, normally the kind of mnemonic that we use is you want to pick your bluffs from the bottom up, right? So you may look at this chart and say, oh, it's easy, Matt. We're going to use pocket nines right off the jump. I would say let's not, though. I would say let's use Jack 10 suited is what I would use here. Because if we use pocket nines, right, which does indeed have the same gut shot draw, right, that if we use Jack 10, the reason we're using that is because it has a gutter. So does pocket nines also. The trouble is, if we use pocket nines, unless you are a supercomputer secretly in human form, you're not going to be able to split up those 6 combos of pocket nines somehow in your brain in real time, and you're going to be over bluffing. If you bluff with 6 combos of pocket nines and you're only raising with 2 combos of queen jack, then your bluff to value ratio is 3-to-1, which is too high. As we've gone over in prior homeworks, and I put here, we want to have about 1.5 bluffs for every value combo. So our target here is to have 3. Well, unless you can figure out how to split up your nines in real time, you'll be over bluffing, right? Same thing with tens. Essentially, tens are the exact same hand in this spot for purposes of what we're discussing. So instead, I advocate using a hand that we can actually in real time think about just using it as these are our bluffs. 3 combos of Jack 10. That's suited. That's exactly what we need. So I submit that's what we should use. Again, it has a pair and a gut shot. In terms of how incredibly strong our opponent's range is on this board, I really don't think it matters which one of those we're using. I don't think any of them has any more showdown value than any of the others. I mean, when you look at how overwhelmingly strong our opponent's range is, a pair of jacks, a pair of tens, a pair of nines, they're all pretty much behind. If he has one of his premium pocket pairs, they're all crushed. They're all crushed. So really doesn't all that matter which one we're using. One of the benefits of using Jack 10, however, is that it does block him having pocket jacks. So, which is one of the hands certainly, which is going to just go ahead and shove on us here, most likely. So if we need another reason to push that into our primary bluffing candidate, the fact that that does block pocket jacks is another benefit and a reason we should be using that as a bluff. So again, those are my only 3 combos, Jack 10 suited, that I use as bluffs here, which gives us a nice clean ratio of, for the answer to number 8 of 3-to-2. That's exactly what we want to have. All right, so everything else we're going to flat with. And that looks like this. There's everything else. Okay, I'm sorry, except for pocket tens and pocket nines. So this is the band that we are calling with here. Everything that has a pair of jacks or queens here that is not Jack 10 suited. Again, if we were calling tens and nines, we would be defending too wide because we would literally be defending with everything. Okay, so let us see if we are defending enough on that topic. All right, so here's how we do this. This is going to be the main theme of the rest of this homework, is performing a bunch of minimum defense calculations. So we've touched on this in some prior homeworks, but let's really go over how you do this now. So the first thing we need to do is look at things from villain's perspective. And let's just say he has any random 2 cards. Doesn't matter what he has. How much required equity does he need to bet what he bet into the pot and have that be a break-even proposition? So here's how we do this. We take his bet of $25 and we take that risk over the risk of $25 again plus the reward, and the reward is what is in the pot currently, which is $42. So in my answer to number 10, you'll see that math broken out there. Pretty easy stuff. 25 over 25 plus 42, that equals 37%. So for this homework, we're just doing raw minimum defense calculations and raw required equity calculations. Realistically, he has some kind of drawing equity, slight as it may be. That means that his required equity in terms of how often he needs to get me to fold here to be a break even, which is what we're calculating, is not exactly what that number gives us, because he doesn't need to get us to fold 37% of the time here when he has any 2 cards. Whenever he has any 2 cards here, they have some kind of drawing equity. But that gets a little bit more complicated. We're just going to, for purposes of this homework illustration, we're just going to keep it as the raw numbers, just to show you how to do it. So, again, that comes out to be approximately 37% of the time. So no matter what he has, if he bets $25 into 42 and he gets us to fold 37% of the time with any 2 cards, that makes it a break-even proposition for him. Okay, so what we do then is, that means we have to defend 63% of the time in order for him not to be able to just bet with impunity here and have it be plus EV for him. And that's simple to figure out. We just take 37%, 100% minus 37%, which is just what inverse means, and that is 63%. So that's how often I have to defend here in order to not be exploitable from a raw minimum defense calculation. All right, so we take that 63%, and then we go back to our range from answer 4, which was, all right, 38 combos on this flop, and we take that number and multiply it by 63%. And that comes out to be that we need to defend with 30 combos. Okay, so we add up our combos then from answer 6, which is those that we are raising for value. Answer 7, that we are raising as a bluff, because even though we're bluffing with it, we're still defending here. That just means, defending just means we're not folding, we're continuing in some fashion. And answer 9, which is those that we are calling with. And that comes out that we need to, pardon me, that we need to defend 30 combos, and we are actually defending with 26. So that to me seems fine. We're under defending by a hair, but I don't really see where I'm getting the extra 4 combos from, because the next 4 combos that I would possibly use would be hands that I'm just not interested in defending with, nor do I really see how I'm going to split my range any better than I have in the above answers. So we don't quite get to the number we need to, but I think it's close enough. Again, we're dealing with incredibly tight ranges here, and it's going to be hard to meet the exact number that we need to, again, without being a supercomputer that can split up something like our pocket tens into we're going to defend with these combos but not with these combos. We really can't do that in real time. Okay, so the combos that we're defending with, we take forward to the turn after we do indeed call with our range again from answer 9. Okay, so now we're going to go to the turn and see what the turn action is, and then perform yet another very similar defense calculation to see how we fare on the turn. Okay, so the turn is the 4 of spades. Let me put that in. And giving us a board of Queen of clubs, Jack of diamonds, 8 of hearts, 4 of spades, a true rainbow board. On the turn, we check again, and the villain bets $45 into the pot of 92. So question 12, are we going to raise anything for value on the turn that we did not raise on the flop? And I think the answer here is pretty clearly no. I mean, we could attempt to do that if we wanted to have some kind of bluffing range also, but our calling range and the combos in it are still so tight on this board that I don't see any reason to bluff, and I see no reason to raise. So that just makes our defense calculation here pretty simple. It's what are we going to call with and what are we going to fold with? There's no other component of our range that we're going to split out here on the turn. All right, so let's, again, question 13, compute what villain's required equity, RE here, is to have his bet of $45 be break even in terms of expected value. The answer to number 13 is, again, we take the $45 over $45 plus the 92 that's in the pot. That is 34% of the time. If he gets us to lay down more than that, then as a raw figure, we would be exploitable. So we had to defend as close to 2/3 of the time, 66%, as we can. All right, so we apply our MDF figure of 2/3 to our calling range from, again, answer 9. All right, 2/3 of 21 combos is 14. And that means that is how many we need to defend with here on the turn. So what are we going to defend with out of the combos that is in this range that you see on your screen? Well, pretty clearly, our top pair of queens, king, queen, offsuit, is going to be our first 9 combos. Then we need to figure out which of our ace jack we're going to use. So how do we split these up? Well, I'm going to use ace jack offsuit. Show you how I split these up here. You'll see the filter down here. Only those that have a spade in them. And why a spade? Well, that makes it more likely, if I call with these, that villain had a holding on the flop that didn't contain a spade, which is, you'll remember, look back up at our board, right? Queen of clubs, Jack of diamonds, 8 of hearts, no spade on the flop. If I have a spade, that means it's more likely that villain was betting on the flop with some kind of backdoor flush draw, and he is double barreling with it now on the turn, even after it didn't come. Okay. So that's a stretch, but it is how we have to split our ace jack. Because if we don't, then if we call with all of our ace jack, then we are literally calling with everything that we brought to the turn. And we can't do that because on every single street, you'll see, this is another point of this homework, even when the ranges are tight like this, you have to narrow your range from street to street, or else you will find yourself over defending. And that's not good either, because that's just as exploitable. Because then your opponent can bet with impunity with any value hand and just know you're going to call 24/7. You have to fold some part of your range on every street, or else you're calling too much. So we need to find some way to split this range out, and so we're going to use ace jack that just has one spade to it. Okay. Let me make sure that I covered something. I did. Okay, so that gives us exactly 14 combos. As you'll see here on the screen, that's nice that we were able to meet our defense frequency right on the nose this time. No error margin. That's always nice. So that brings us to the river, which is where my interesting decision point came up. In the actual hand, let's see what we think. All right, so our range from answer 14, which is on the screen, is what we come to the river with. And with 182 in the pot, the river is now the 8 of spades. And here's our final board up here. We check again, and the villain bets 145 into 182. So a pretty substantially, in terms of ratio to the pot, upsized river bet here. And that's perfectly fine from villain. It is still balanced as long as he's doing it with the appropriate amount of his combos. Don't quite know if that's the case, but we just need to figure out how often we need to defend as a result of his sizing. So his bet of 145 into 182, we'll do the required equity calculation one last time here. 145 over 145 plus the 182 in the pot gives us, for answer 15, 44%. So you'll see this is higher than it has been before because his bet sizing is higher. Not surprising there, which gives us a lower minimum defense frequency. So we only need to defend here 56% of the time. So in contrast to the term where we need to defend 2/3 of the time, here we need to defend only a little over half. So let's see how we fare there. All right, so we need to defend with 8 combos on the river in order to meet minimum defense. When we take 56 times our 14 that you see on the screen. So how are we going to split that up? All right, well, here, this is pretty simple. We have 9 combos of king, queen. I don't really see a way to break that up. So what we're going to do here is we're going to call with our king, queen, and we're going to drop out all of our ace jack for 9 combos, and that's what we're going to defend with here. It's a slight over defend, but I don't think it's terrible by any means. And again, in real time, there's no way to just randomly drop out one king-queen combo. So, how did I do? Well, I got to this river with ace of hearts, jack of spades, which we saw back from answer 14 was something I should have had. It was ace jack. that had one of the cards as a spade, and I called with that on the turn, as I think I should have, and then I went ahead and I folded to Villain's river bet here, and I remember when I did so thinking I probably have enough queens in my range that I don't need to defend with any of my ace jack, with any jacks whatsoever. Obviously, if I'm not defending with ace jack, I'm not defending with any other jacks either, king jack, etc. So I thought, well, I think I have enough queens here to defend. I don't need to get down to ace jack, so I fold. And afterwards, I actually mentioned that to the villain. I told him what I had, and unfortunately, he told me he was bluffing. I forget exactly what it was with, but that's really not the point of the hand. And I said, do you think I needed to defend there with ace jack, or did I have enough queens? And it was cool because this villain, I now immediately knew that he was a very talented player who knew what he was doing, because he knew what I was talking about right away. And he thought about it and he said, no, I don't think you need to defend that. I think you can just defend with a queen. So there you go. He agreed also. And now it seems like I am justified in my decision, which is not why I did this as a homework problem. I would have just been as pleased to come up with the other answer, that I screwed this up and should have called with ace jack. As long as we're learning something by the exercise, it really shouldn't matter what answer we come up with, as long as we can learn from it. So if it had turned out I was supposed to call here with ace of hearts, jack of spades, then I would have learned that and would have been more prepared next time to defend a little wider than I had here. But what I learned from this for answer 18, I didn't bother to write out the essay because I'm going to go ahead and cover it here, is that if you have a tighter range like this and somebody who's betting a pretty reasonable size all the way down, it looks like a good place to eyeball it is in a very tight situation like this. Probably you're going to have enough top pair that you really don't, by the river, need to get down to defending with middle pair. There are going to be some exceptions to that rule, I'm sure, but you probably need to call all the way down to the river. You probably shouldn't be folding the turn with that. And to anyone out there who is a little hesitant to adopt this kind of strategy across all three streets, I know there's something in the poker brain which kind of revolts against this idea of, well, if I call on flop and turn and then I fold on river, why the heck did I call on flop and turn to begin with? And let me just ask you, if you're thinking that, that's okay, but take a step back and see why it is that you're thinking that. I would submit to you that why you're thinking that is because you are viewing your goal in poker as trying to put your opponent on a hand. You're trying to figure out, what does my opponent have that are his specific two cards in this hand, and is my current holding ahead of it? If you're thinking that way, and that is the thinking that generates the result of why I feel stupid for having called two streets and now folding on the river, you're not thinking in terms of ranges sufficiently. And that is the next step that you should look for in the evolution of your learning and your poker game as a whole, is to constantly be thinking range versus range. On the flop and on the turn, we needed to call with, in this particular hand, ace jack with a spade for the reasons that we went over, because we don't know what component of his range he has until his range narrows over the streets as well. As his range narrows, our range narrows as well. Both of us have this pyramidal structure, and then on the river, we see here that our one holding of ace jack has run out of room. If he's still betting here on the river, then he just doesn't have a part of his range that our ace jack is ahead of. But we could have on the turn, if he had checked here on the river and we checked back, we would suspect that we would have the winner a sufficient amount of time to have justified our call with ace jack on the turn. And I bet you very highly that that would be correct. So never feel bad about calling for one street and then folding on the next, even calling for two streets like we did here and then folding on the river, just as long as you can go back using an analysis like we did here and figure out, did I meet my minimum defense over the streets, or was I potentially over defending on any street? If you were, and you reach the river with a hand that you should never have reached in the first place, and you fold with it then, and you should have folded it on the turn, well, that would be something that you could learn from there. That would be your error in that type of situation. You would learn to fold that quicker. But here, with ace jack, it turns out that that's something that, at least in terms of how I structure my ranges from pre-flop, that's something I need to defend with. So now your answers might have different. They may have differed, sorry, as mine, because if you were defending wider pre-flop here, I bet you got very different answers of what you needed to defend with, because you just had more combos to defend with from street to street. So your answers might have turned out totally different. That's fine, as long as you understand the analysis here and you can use it in your future hands to do likewise and figure out, did I do the right thing with one particular holding? All right, so that's, you can see why I didn't write out my answer to answer 18, because it was like a 10-minute essay there, but I hope you got something out of that. So that's it for this month's homework problem. Hope you enjoyed that. It is something that you can use when you have a hand like this against a balanced opponent to do this similar walkthrough. I will add one little caveat. Never forget that this is a homework problem and we're doing these defense calculations because our opponent is somebody who is balanced enough that we want to do this. That's not going to be probably 8 out of 10 players. I forget most places. Only in Atlantic City are there 10-handed tables, right? Okay, so 7 out of the 9 people at your normal poker tables, right? There may be one other person besides yourself who is playing at a level where you want to incorporate this kind of thinking. Everyone else, just exploit the hell out of them. You don't need to worry about defending at some kind of balanced range, because they're not betting in any kind of balanced fashion. Their betting is all over the place. You can figure it out, and then you can do things like hand read them into oblivion and put them on specific holdings. You always want to be thinking in ranges, but there comes a point at which, again, some opponents are just like, okay, yeah, I know what you have now, and you can just play accordingly. So, but against a villain like this, now you know how to do a thinking analysis both in real time and off the table that gets you the answers that you're looking for. Did I defend properly? So that'll be it for our October 2018 homework webinar here. Hope you enjoyed. The problem for next month's homework will be up shortly, if it's not already by the time this video goes live. Tracy and I have been a touch busy lately with some projects, including the compilation book editing and some other stuff too we'll be talking about in the days to come. So slight apology for these things getting up a little later than I would usually like, but time just seems to fly. But hope you're enjoying all the premium content you get with your subscription. And as always, if you have any comments, feedback on this or any other content you're getting on Patreon, love to hear from it. If you'd like more of some stuff, less of some other things, We'd be glad to hear from you now, especially those who've been with us as premium subscribers for quite a while. If you're starting to develop opinions on what you'd like to see, more or less of, please do let us know, either through the comments on Patreon, send us an email, hit us up on Discord, etc. Thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful week. Good variance to you all.